All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Happy Hump Day. Thanks everybody for joining today's Q&A to review the Sports Innovation Lab's PowerPlay Index. My name is Gina Waldhorn. I'm COO of the Sports Innovation Lab. And over the next hour, we're going to dive into what it is and how we made it and offer some Q&A. So before we get kick things off today, I'll go ahead and wanted to introduce the host for today, which is going to be Josh Walker, who's the co-founder and president of the Sports Innovation Lab. Josh was formerly a VP of research at Forrester, and he stewards the lab's progressive research practice. Also introduced the world to the concept of the fluid fan. He leads the Sports Innovation Lab's client roster of over 50 blue chip sports brands in understanding how to create breakthrough fan experiences. And of late, you probably heard from Josh being featured in outlets like Sports Illustrated, Synopsis, or Future Sport, as he's become a leading voice in what the resurgence of sports will look like and helping to guide organizations for bringing sports back. So thrilled to be able to hand it over to Josh in a minute and have him kick off the conversation. And also joining Josh today is Molly Tissenbaum, Product Manager for the Sports Innovation Lab, with experience at doing research and social media at Baseball Prospectus and KBS. Molly's a graduate of Harvard University, where she also played on the varsity hockey team. So with that, Molly, Josh, going to hand it over to you guys to kick us off and bring us through the PowerPlay Index.
Great. Thank you, Gina. And thank you guys for joining us today. We've kept this purposely small so that you can ask your questions as we move through this. I'll try to give you a brief introduction to what the product does. And then obviously I brought Molly around because I needed the big brains to explain how it works. We're going to have a quick agenda here to really describe what the PowerPlay Index is. We're going to give you a very specific example of the first PowerPlay Index that we published into the industry around the fan behavior of connecting in a venue when fans are at a live sporting event or entertainment event. We've asked John to join us from Extreme because the company has pushed very aggressively in enabling this fan behavior. And a lot of the reason they're in the PowerPlay Index is because of what they did last year. So we'll have John touch on what Extreme is up to in this space. And then we'll end with a really good example of how you can modify or customize the PowerPlay Index to help you make decisions in your own world as your priorities change as a company. So with that as the agenda, I wanted to give a nod to my co-founder who's on this call, but a little under the weather. Back in 2016, when I met with Angela, I was doing the stuff on the left-hand side of your screen, which was using Google to try to figure out what the sports industry looked like and what products were impacting the fan experience. I was trying to build a startup of my own, and I was very disappointed with how much information was out there. So I did what all of you do, which is I went to Google, I tried to figure out what companies were out there. I started organizing them by what segments I thought they competed in. I tried to figure out which of the products were different. And I tried to come up with a short list of companies that I thought really mattered so that I knew who to partner with or talk to or help me take my product and my company to market. Angela was at the IOC at that time. And she saw some of the pictures that I put together and she's like, this is great, but like, how do you know when a new company comes out? Or how do you know which one's the best? And what if like the market changes and somebody wins a new deal and does something different? And I said, well, I mean, I guess I'd have to update it. And that was 2016. And it was a pain in the ass to update this. And I was on Google all the time. And I was always trying to figure out what mattered to the industry by talking to experts. So we spent the last 4 years really replicating that process by using technology and data so that it wasn't my opinion or all the work that I had to do on Google to come up with a short list of companies that mattered to the industry. And to make sure it wasn't just my opinion or my colleague's opinion at Sports Innovation Lab, we crowdsourced the important information from our leadership boards, from expert advisors in the industry, so that we could figure out what really moved the needle when you were looking at products or companies in a particular space. So we now have a PowerPlay Index, which is data-driven, which takes this mess on the left, simplifies it, and allows you to come up with a short list of companies you should be talking to either work with them as a client or a partner, or obviously recognize them as competitors in a market you hope to move into. So the key attributes of the technology platform we've built really address some of the things that you guys currently do to make decisions about which companies to work with or compete with. And we've done this by aligning technology collection to fan behaviors that move the industry forward. We started with the philosophy of it's the fan behavior that matters as an organizing principle, not some technology buzzword like OTT or sports betting or something like that. It's really a behavior that drives what fans are doing. And there's certain technologies and certain companies that make those behaviors possible. That's the organizing principle of a PowerPlay Index. And then, as I mentioned, we crowdsource what requirements our customers believe are important to make sure that that behavior happens. So if the behavior is user-generated content, I want my fans sharing content with their friends, I want them being really social during the game, we talk to all the experts in the industry and they tell us, well, you need highlight clipping, you need social media integration, you need to make sure you have media rights and digital rights management. They give us all the terms and technologies that we need to pay attention to, and then we can go out and source the companies that matter most in that space. So we do all that hard work for you. And then we use market signals, publicly available information, the same information you would find if you were doing market research on your own, to evaluate whether or not these companies have market validation. So we do technology alignment, which I'll go through in a second. And then we try to figure out who has market validation, which means who's working with these companies in the market. And as those new deals get announced, as new partnerships happen, we're able to track that, and the PowerPlay Index changes accordingly. Now, if you're a skeptic, which many of you will be, and I am as well, you'll recognize that that measures publicly available signals. So you immediately say, well, then I'll just put out more press releases and say we're working with the NBA, we're working with the NFL, we're working with Major League Baseball. Well, good luck. Call up all those companies and ask them if you could put out a press release if you're not working with them. You cannot game the system. You need to have true momentum in the marketplace to be able to say that you're the official provider of an OTT platform to a particular league, venue, or property. You need to have real momentum in the marketplace before you can go out and say you're the official cloud provider for the NBA. So those public signals can't be manufactured. And the more frequently they show up and the more the industry pays attention to those, the more market validation we believe you have. That's a data-driven analysis of how much momentum a particular company has in the market. And then finally, what Molly will touch on at the end is that you can actually change the priorities based on what you care about most. And we'll show you a specific example of that in a few minutes. Our clients use the PowerPlay Index to create a short list of companies to work with, but they also use it to do competitive analysis. You can quickly figure out whether or not you're in the position to compete with other companies in the marketplace based on how well the market sees you in that particular category. And we'll touch on that as well. So what we're measuring is really what I'd like Molly to walk you guys through right now, which is we look at the technology alignment, which I spoke about a second ago, and the market validation. And we've spent months trying to figure out how to organize this in a way that gives us a data-driven answer as to who are the top 10 companies on this chart. And what Molly will touch on, which is really, really important, is there's another dozen or 2 dozen companies that don't make the cut. So just being on the PowerPlay Index is a really good signal that you take this fan behavior very seriously. Molly, you want to walk people through the 2 axes?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Josh. So when we talk about technology alignment, which is the x-axis of the image, the graphic that you're about to see, what we're looking for is the strength of association between certain technologies and certain vendors. And we score that so that in a way that eliminates, as Josh was alluding to earlier, the gaming the system, where you can just start putting out, thousands of press releases and blogs about a particular solution. Our scoring system takes into account how closely and how strongly you're related to a particular set of technologies. And the way that we determine which technologies to include is a combination of software and people. So the first thing that we do is we look into our software that's been tracking the industry for 4 years, and we see what's trending. And then what we do from there is we take those technologies and we vet them with our leadership boards. And we have access to, some of the smartest people in the industry who are leaders in particular spaces. And we get them to give us a sanity check on whether or not these are the right technologies in combination in order to deliver on a fan behavior. So to give you guys an example of what that looks like, for this particular PowerPlay Index, when we're talking about connect, getting fans to connect, we went out to our leadership board and talked about the 4 technologies you see in front of you: 5G, Wi-Fi, DAS systems, which is distributed antenna systems, and cell networks. And initially, when we went out with this version 1 of our PowerPlay Index, we had all 4 of those technologies weighted equally. And what we heard from the industry when we started talking to our leadership board members was 5G and Wi-Fi networks are much more important and will become much more important in the future than DAS systems. So when we ran our analysis a second time, what we did was we increased the impact of an association with 5G or Wi-Fi networks, and we decreased the impact of a DAS system connection on the overall technology score.
And just to add to that, Molly, we also were made aware of a number of emerging standards like Wi-Fi 6 and other things that were making their way into the market that, again, you wouldn't see if you were just Googling, because you'd be stuck in the weeds of some sort of standards board documentation because nobody had released product in that space yet. So the leading signals we get from speaking to our leadership board is also a very valuable piece of our analysis.
And then what you'll see on the y-axis is what Josh was calling market validation. And what we're looking for with market validation is, again, the strength and the depth of a company's association with leagues, teams, venues, and other companies. So when we first started running this Connect PowerPlay Index, some of the types of companies that we were looking for relationships with included sports betting, included augmented reality experiences. They included, mobile ordering. And when COVID-19 hit and we realized that in order for fans to get back to the stadium and back to sports, they're going to need to feel safe in their experience at the stadium, we shifted what the partner companies are going to be focused on. So those companies are now physical security, biometric security, loyalty messaging programs, so that it's not just, are you associated with the venues as it pertains to Connect, but also can you integrate and support all of the adjacent fan behaviors that are important to bringing fans back to the venue.
And that's another example of how dynamic this is. As the market changes and the priorities and requirements change in the market, we're able to emphasize or de-emphasize certain things behind the scenes.
So as Josh said earlier, we only plot 10 companies on a particular PowerPlay Index. And that's not to say that the 10 that are on the graphic are the only 10 that do connect or that help fans connect, but they're the companies that scored the highest when we were looking for solutions that help fans connect. So what you're looking at now is the description of how we break down those categories. So what you're looking at in the blue square in the top right are game changers. So those are the companies or company that has the strongest market validation and the strongest tech alignment for a particular period of time. And I think it's really important to remember that anything that we're looking at is within a particular period of time. So for this analysis, we're looking at the full year, calendar year of 2019, but we could also do this to compare the first half of the year and the second half of the year to see how things move over that period of time. The MVPs are companies that also they've established themselves in the market and they're delivering on most of these fan behaviors, but they haven't quite broken that barrier to become game changers. Challengers are companies that are, they're pushing, they're in the market, they're providing services to leagues and venues around the world. And prospects are emerging or established brands who are just starting to focus on a particular fluid fan behavior. So when we go to the next slide and you see the PowerPlay Index, you'll notice Intel is in that prospect category. And while it may seem sort of counterintuitive at first that a massive tech company like Intel would be in a prospect category, we have to reshift our focus and remember that everything that we're looking at on this PowerPlay Index has to do with how we can get fans to connect. So Intel has started to focus on how to support fans when they want to connect in the venue, but there are other companies that have been doing this longer that have more validation and more tech alignment, and that's what you're seeing when you look at the PowerPlay Index.
And one of the things you'll notice is that Intel would immediately say, well, a number of these companies on here are our partners and our customers, because we're not in the B2C business of providing connectivity, but we are in the B2B business of empowering a lot of the technology providers that need to have this infrastructure and the high processing, chips and other sort of products that Intel's building. They show up here quite a bit now because of their relationship as a top sponsor in the Olympics, but also a lot of the immersive media technology that they started to develop and put into stadiums with their TrueView technology. And we'll show you in a bit how this changes when you emphasize 5G versus some of the other criteria that we have. So this is a really good example of why we asked John to join us, because there's something about this that is time-based. And we are looking at the period, as Molly mentioned, of 2019. So John, I think now's a really good time, to say hello and allow you to introduce yourself, but also to have you talk a little bit about what was 2019 like at Extreme, and why do you think you guys have built so much momentum in the sports vertical?
Sounds great, Josh. Thanks, Molly, as well for inviting me to attend today. By the way, I'll be the first one to say I think your data is spectacular and spot on. But honestly, the thing that drew me to this is the way you do your analysis. I do think it's open. I think it takes out the biases that potentially exist out there and looks at the data in a really constructive way. And that's the way we like to view it. And of course, the outcome for us is very favorable, but I think it's also very fair. So that's just my input on the data.
Well, I want you to remember you said that because we recorded this, and if it changes in 6 months, we have it on tape. No, but I think that the question is, and this is what Molly and I go through as we do each of these, and she has 2 or 3 more that we're working on actively right now around the behavior of learn and stream, and those are behaviors that are really important to fans as well. There's a role that you have, especially with the NFL, that amplifies your presence, right? It makes you feel like a very important provider to the sports industry. There's other data in our system that shows that it's not just the NFL. And I thought it would be really helpful for you to talk about, where else you've been successful. And one last caveat on my end is this is very North American focused, right? Our natural language processing can't do other languages. So you saw Vodafone on there, you saw Ericsson on there. If these companies are dominating in other markets, we have a harder time seeing that. We'll continue to work on that. I'm teaching Molly Spanish and German as we speak, but that is a bias that we have in our data, and I want to acknowledge that. So with all of those caveats, please, what was 2019 like at Extreme?
Yeah. So 2019 was a great year for Extreme, and little background on myself, I manage our sports entertainment practice. And I think one of the reasons we've been so successful is we launched this practice back in 2012. And we went at it with the mindset that we were going to be 100% dedicated to this space and build a team that all they do is wake up every day and try to figure out what are the technology, what are the challenges of the space, and try to solve that. And certainly, if you look back in 2012, where we had, very few customers, and then compare it to where we stand today, I mean, it's night and day. But I think ultimately the focus and the dedication to the market is really what differentiated us and made us successful over the long term. And I think what the data you're showing isn't something overnight. It took several years for us to build an account base, to build relationships with the leagues, and then continue to kind of build on those over time. So for 2019 specifically, it was a great year. It started off early in the calendar year where, as you mentioned, we do have an NFL relationship. We're the official Wi-Fi solution provider for the NFL. We'll talk a little bit later what that means. But we're also the official Wi-Fi analytics provider for the NFL. And what that is we provide an over-the-top application that's deployed in roughly, I think, 27 stadiums now, 27 NFL stadiums, that provides a cloud-based dashboard and providing information exactly what fans are doing in venue, what applications they're looking at, what applications reports into them, how much data they're passing, and it aggregates that at the league level. Teams get individual views of that. So in the beginning of 2019, as we've done for the last, I think, 5 Super Bowls, our analytics platform was running in Atlanta at last year's Super Bowl. So that's how we sort of kicked off the year. Always a big event. The Super Bowl in itself is obviously one of the largest events in the world. And people really pay attention to what happens from an analytics perspective, not just how much data they pass, but what were people doing. So we share that data on a global basis and as part of our NFL relationship. From there,
just let me jump in real quick.
Sure.
When you look at that relationship, and for full disclosure, again, JMA and Cisco are clients of the Sports Innovation Lab. Extreme is not. You guys, when you're in those venues, are you often in a venue with a JMA, a Cisco, somebody else that's providing different services to the particular stadium or team? What does it mean to be the official provider for the NFL?
Sure, great question. And it means, actually, the high-level answer is it means all those things. So if you look at Extreme, the portfolio provide, one piece of it is the analytics. That analytics package may be running on an Extreme infrastructure, our Wi-Fi solutions, our Wi-Fi 6 solutions, but it may be running on a competitive solution as well. It could be Cisco or HP or potentially other solutions. It is not running on top of the DAS infrastructure. So those are 5G. Those two things are separate and distinct.
But are you guys blind to all cellular activity if they're using a boosted 4G or 5G implementation?
We are, in most cases. The only exception I'll say is there is a concept now on Wi-Fi networks where we are doing offload to carriers. So in those cases, we do have some visibility into that data that's going on the Wi-Fi network, but authentication to the carriers. But in essence, a 5G system and a Wi-Fi system, although complementary, are for two separate systems. So from a visibility perspective, they're separate and distinct.
And what fan behavior do you see most frequent? This is a fan behavior analysis. It's about giving the fans the behavior to connect. When you look at your analytics, either at large or within some of the larger venues in the US, what are fans doing online?
The answer really is, you can talk about the numbers, and the unfortunate thing, or fortunate, depending on how you look at it, is a lot of things that organically happen the way your phone functions on Wi-Fi are the things we see most of, which aren't all that exciting. So for example, when you look at the Super Bowl statistics, a huge proportion of data is simply your phone uploading and backing up photos, right? You take a photo, that happens automatically. So always the number 1 and 2 things that happen in a venue are things that just automatically happen as a function of your phone. Mm-hmm. Once you get past that, which in itself isn't all that exciting, there's some really cool trends that you can start to see with how people are using the networks. The reality is, what we see from the data is people do what's important to them, but it's surprising to see what they're doing. For example, we saw in this year's Super Bowl a big rise in Netflix data. So that means you're coming to a Super Bowl, but now you're streaming something on Netflix. So i.e. parents maybe bringing kids in, watching other content. So a really odd behavior, or maybe not odd, but just sort of an interesting behavior.
No, I would say that's odd behavior. I don't pay thousands of dollars to watch Netflix, but yes, I get it.
Yeah, I know.
We also had Ken on from his Cisco yesterday on an AMA, and Molly mentioned we tried to pivot a little bit of the analysis based on contact tracing and some of the things that are coming up now in the conversation of COVID. Does your analysis, does your analytics also help you figure out if crowds are gathering, and do you have the power to do that in real time in the sense of like notifying fans through a mobile application or something that they should disperse?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge area of both opportunity and focus for us right now. And in terms of the dialogue we're having right now with both our existing customers and people that are really starting to think about what's it going to look like when fans start coming back in. The areas that we're really focused on short term right now is everything being contactless, right? So how are you going to scan your tickets? How are you going to do food services? How are you going to deal with, for example, bathroom lines? Those are big areas from a technology perspective that we can help solve. So if you think about how a person comes to a game, that's all going to have to change, right? How they're routed in, spacing. We started that trend a few years ago just simply by you had to do ticketless scanning as part of that process. But now if you sort of put that whole premise that it's going to be even significantly larger than that, different requirements, we're targeting sort of doing high density implementations now outside the stadium and venues to account for that. And a lot of venues haven't accounted for that. They've been doing traditional ticket scanning, which is one thing. So it's almost like targeted high density Wi-Fi at ticketing. The other places we're looking at sort of targeted basis is, again, around concessions, where it's going to have to be contactless. So we're going to have individual implementations of doing stuff like that. The other piece that you mentioned too is the visibility into that. A big area that we've invested in and continue to invest in are things like having real information about users, dwell time, and their association around people, and how important that data was always from a traditional sponsorship activation. And are we being efficient from an operation, saying, hey, do we have too many people at this concessions? We should really move them over to a different area. That was always sort of the goal of this sort of location stuff. But now it's going to change where it's, hey, do we have too many people congregating in an area? That should concern. Should we kick off an alarm for that? Can we now tie that to a user based on the way they authenticate the network? So those are all the things that we're working on, because honestly, they're going to be requirements most likely going into any plan that calls for bringing fans back into these venues.
So you saw some of the technology terms that we use to measure this industry and how connection happens with the fans. Was there something we missed? Was there something you would have added to that list and said, look, in the COVID world or in the next 6 to 12 months, it's going to be really important that, Sports Innovation Lab focus on this in addition to these other technologies that we are currently paying attention to?
No, I think you did a great job of capturing that. Like I said, I think what we're spending a lot of time now is just trying to see a little bit out and see what those requirements are. And a lot of the technologies, in my mind, have existed. We're just sort of going to be applying them in different ways. And the hard part of that is we have a little bit of a moving target. Just when you think you have a feel of what the requirements are going to be or what the timelines are going to be, it changes. It's super dynamic. So, but I do think you did a great job of capturing it.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to talk about how we expect people to use this, because the market does change. But also, I'd like to ask you to weigh in on this too. You've seen the analysis. How would you use this as extreme to kind of keep track of the market and what's happening? What answers do you think this would give you, and what questions would you ask the PowerPlay Index to kind of help you get smarter about what's going on in the competitive landscape?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the first thing that occurs to me is, again, I love that it's a data-driven analysis. So it takes a lot of the biases out there. So for us, when we look at it, regardless of what our position was, I think it's a quick way to understand, hey, is there a weakness in this area? And you describe both what your X and Y axis was. So that's interesting, because I didn't think about it that way. And I also didn't think about sort of the part that you can't just sort of, start putting a bunch of volume out there to gain sort of the market recognition that you described. So for us, it's a good validating point. But the other thing I think it does is provide, you have perceptions of what you think what your view is in the market and what you're doing well, but it also starts to identify areas that you aren't doing well. So that's always the conversation. It's a lot easier, and we do a lot of planning around this on our side. Is what is the market perception of you? Not what we think, not what we think our strengths and weaknesses, but what does the market think about you? And that's the way we've always formulated our solutions, our go-to-market. I'll give you a good example of that. We've always been considered a leader in high-density Wi-Fi. But what the market started to tell us was, particularly with Wi-Fi 6 technology, we knew there was going to be a window of opportunity. So when we went to present that to our own internal organization, said we want to invest early. We want to be the first go-to-market with Wi-Fi 6. And by the way, we want to build a specific stadium solution or a venue solution that's 100% designed in this space, meaning you can't use it anywhere else. I had to sort of justify why we wanted to do that. And the data we have helped us sort of make that decision, be early to market. And if you look why we're in the position right now, one of the key things was we were early with Wi-Fi 6. We were early, not only early, but we're the only ones that came to market with a venue-specific solution. And then we had 7 implementations of those in 2019, which was market leading. So I think it's really powerful to take the data, say how does the market perceive us? What's the market opportunity? Use that to do justification internally on why we want to make this investment. And then you get to see the success of it.
And that's actually a good articulation of how we quality assurance our own technology. We actually do some sort of modified version of A/B testing where the humans go off and try to create the PowerPlay Index. And then we generate it with the data and we try to see why they resulted in different answers or not. Because again, what we're trying to do is emulate that person at the company that's being told to go try to find somebody to help improve the connection fans have at the venue. And where do they start, right? They start looking for articles. They start trying to talk to people at other stadiums and try to figure out what's working. They do some RFP stuff. If we can accelerate that by giving them a short list and saying, hey, start here, keep your eye on these requirements, and these will be the top 5 to 10 companies that show up, then our data is actually emulating that experience and hopefully accelerating some of these decisions and making them better for the industry. Molly, can you take the mic now and really walk people through how we can use this tool when they want to change the outcome or emphasize something that's important to their company?
Yeah, so really the sort of the 3 bullets that we've got here in terms of how you can use the PowerPlay Index. The first we've been hammering since we started. It's a really quick way to get the short list of particular solutions providers for specific fan behavior. What John alluded to was the way that we use it with clients for number 2, which is to figure out how you compare to other solutions in the market. And what our clients get and what's really powerful about the PowerPlay Index is when we open our dashboard that we use internally to build this index, we can actually click through on any of the companies that you see and see what's actually powering their score. So when John was talking about Wi-Fi 6 and the different rollouts that they've done in 2019, we actually have that data in our system, and we were able to see that before we even built the actual graphic. So if we have a client who comes to us, we're in a challenger position, what is it that contributed to our score, and how can we move the needle to become an MVP or a game changer? We have the information and the infrastructure underneath in order to help understand what it is that moves the needle and how to get there.
And I think the most important point on that is it's also a business development tool, because we can show you where other competitors have relationships on that market validation axis. And we can say, there's white space at FIFA, there's white space at Bundesliga, and there's white space at the PLL. these are places where there's no official Wi-Fi 6 provider or connectivity partner. Those should be at the top of your list. Or you could say, look, I've been hearing that these guys are struggling over here. Tell me where they are, and I want to go after their accounts to take business from them. And again, by clicking into the data, you can see where those associations are strongest, and you can do your business planning around that.
And so if you go to the last slide that we've got here, this is what our custom work looks like for clients. So if we have a client who comes to us and says, we already have an official Wi-Fi provider, if we're the NFL says to us, we already have an official Wi-Fi provider in Extreme, what we need to focus on is figuring out who can be our 5G provider, as an example. What we do on the back end, again, with this dashboard is we're able to change the emphasis on what we're measuring. So as you can see in this graphic, what we're looking at is if we focus in exclusively on relationships that are pertinent to 5G, we get a different sense of who's a game changer, who's an MVP, who's a challenger, and who's a prospect. And unsurprisingly, Verizon is at the top. Again, we skew North American. The NFL and Verizon have been working together for a number of years. But what you see is that all it takes is for us to understand from a client perspective what the priorities are in order for us to shift our analysis and help find different solutions and white space.
And I'll emphasize this because I came from Forrester Research and I helped them build the Wave. And before we designed the Wave, which is their Magic Quadrant that competes with Gartner, everybody was like, well, I'll just take what's in the top right. The whole point here is that this is a tool to help you make those decisions, not the answer. It gives you a short list, and then you have to still do your due diligence because your requirements matter. So while we've made your life a lot easier, it's not something you just take to the bank and go make a decision without doing your homework. So that's really what we wanted to cover with you guys today. I'm happy to answer any questions if you guys want to shoot them in the chat window. We've recorded this so you guys can share this with your colleagues who are unable to join or with some of your customers so you have a better understanding of what we're doing. But we're also happy to continue to answer questions and walk you guys through this. Some of the most powerful things you can do with the PowerPlay Index are the things Molly just mentioned, which give you the opportunity to dive deep into the data, see some of the data points that back up this analysis, so you get a little bit more comfort that we're looking at the market signals that matter most. And then you can change your own requirements and see what the results are and get a different answer because that might be helpful to you and your organization. So with that, I'm going to give you guys about another minute or two to ask any questions, but also thank you, John, for joining us today. Is there anything that you wanted to end with on your end of things?
No, I think the other benefit we talked about offline of the PowerPlay Index is it does truly make us better, and there is a competitive aspect to that. I think that's a good thing, right? That the industry says it, and I like the fact that it actually does change. So to my mind, and it should evolve as you continue to, strengthen your position or do different things. It's impacted by that in the future, and I think it's a really powerful tool because what happened in 19 doesn't mean anything what's necessarily going to happen in the future. So I think that can be really powerful going forward.
So we thank you for that. What we have is a question from Johnny Boyd. Does the PPI reward firms with market status quo market share? Does the PPI recognize best service provider today with innovative and effective service and product? So one of the things I wanted to make sure we touched on throughout this conversation was that there's no qualitative nature to our data assessment. We are looking at how frequently companies are associated with the things that we think matter to the industry, and the strength of that association is why they're placed where they are. We do not do product testing. We do not speak to customers to impact this analysis. We will rule companies out if we talk to enough of our leadership board members and they say, look, you can't put those guys on there. They're absolutely horrible. We do take that feedback. That's consensus feedback from our experts and our leadership board. But there's no qualitative nature about whether or not Extreme Cisco, JMA, Intel, all their products. What we're saying is these are 10 companies that are focused on helping fans connect in the venue. Extreme right now has strong market validation and really good tech alignment with the things that matter. Molly touched on all of that, but we're not in a position to say we've tested, Extreme's products or anybody else's and validate their customer product performance and service. Hope that helps. Any other questions? All right. I think if we stay on too long, it get really awkward and weird silence. You guys have our connections, our contact information. Reach out if you'd like to chat with us further. John, thanks for taking time to join Molly and myself, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.